when we go through the Bible and we're reading and memorizing studies and this sort of thing, Proverbs seems to be one that we keep coming back to. I mean, we're all kind of familiar with the Book of Proverbs. And in fact, if I were to ask you for some of your memory verses or whatever, chances are probably one of them comes out of the Book of Proverbs. And so, but I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding sometimes about this book. And so one of the things to remember is who wrote it. King Solomon wrote this book, and it is, at times it seems random. I mean, it seems like he's just switching gears left and right as you're reading through it. One verse doesn't seem to have anything to do with the next verse, and there's just a lot of strangeness about it. But I think a lot of the strangeness to us comes from the fact that we try to read it in a different way. So what I want to do this morning is talk about wisdom and talk about that is what the book of Proverbs is all about. It's about wisdom. And who better to tell us about wisdom than the man that the Bible claims to be the wisest man who ever lived. And this was pretty much because of his humbleness at one point in his life, whenever he had an opportunity to ask God for anything, but he chose to ask him for wisdom to lead the people. So such a selfless request was granted by God, and he was given abundance of wisdom. And as Kevin had presented to us about Solomon's writing in Ecclesiastes, he gives us this wisdom in understanding of life and how life, in and of itself, without God, left to our own devices, is completely empty. There's no reason for it. It's completely useless. There's nothing here for us whenever it all boils down to it. That we'll never find true happiness if we're always looking to fill a need. And no matter, if you think about that, how we are as humans, we think, okay, man, if I could just get through high school, dude, life will be great, And then you get out of high school, and it's like, wow, if I could just get through this college, life would be awesome. I'd give me a good job, and et cetera, et cetera. Or if I could just get married, or if I could just do that. And you have this thing you're looking forward to, and then you get married, and then you get a job, and whatever. And then before long, you're going, man, I wish I was back in high school. Or, man, I wish that I'd enjoy those college days again where I had no responsibilities, or whatever. And so it seems like no matter where we are, and that just goes on for the rest of your life, because you're like, okay, if I can just get that next promotion, life will be great. If I could just get a raise, if I could just get that other job, that guy over there, he's got it good, man. I need what he's got. And we spend our time doing this. Wait till retirement. It's going to be great, isn't it? Well, it never ends. And that's because that's the design of a fallen world. And we live in that. And so God has chosen this messenger of his, Solomon, to give us a little bit of wisdom. And so in Ecclesiastes, he does talk about how we find our fulfillment not through the things of this world, but in our service to God. And in Proverbs, it's not a lot different. He's talking about how do you become wise. That's the whole point of it. But because we take it in bite-sized chunks, we tend to lose track of that sometimes. So one of the first things that we need to know is the style of the book. Anytime you do any type of study, there's a term used in theological circles called hermeneutics. And what hermeneutics, it basically comes from the Greek god Hermes, of all things that we're going to use that. But anyway, it's about the message, because Hermes was the Greek god he was a messenger. And so the point was, how do you get the message of a book? So hermeneutics is about understanding what you're reading and coming up with tools to use to understand what you're reading. And so when we read the Bible, we've got to know what style of writing this is. because they're all going to be different. You've got historical studies, you've got prophecies, you've got books of wisdom, you've got the Gospels, you've got just historic information. There's all these different styles of writing in the Bible, and you don't treat one like the other. You don't take a parable of Jesus and treat it like it's historical, accurate, these people actually lived and this really happened and this is a historical record of it. Like you would the book of Deuteronomy or Exodus, where Moses is telling you what happened to the people as they were traveling in the wilderness. This is a historical record. And you don't treat it the same way as you would treat parts of the book of Daniel, where he's in a vision, giving us prophecy, or Ezekiel, or Isaiah, or any of these other prophets that are giving us things that are metaphoric, they're allegorical, there's something that's going to happen in the future, and it's given in a very cryptic way. Or the book of Revelation. And that's a big one, isn't it? I mean, people read the book of Revelation, and it's hard to determine what's literal and what's figurative in those writings. But if we know the context, and we know that this is written to be historic, or this is written to be prophetic, or this is written to be a proverb. Now think about what the word proverb actually means. It's actually a good name for the books, because it gives you these little antecedents that teach you how to be wise. And we'll get to that here in just a minute. But one thing before we get off the slide that I wanted to mention is that if we flatten out the Bible and treat it all the same, then we're doing God a disservice, because He has built it with this beautiful design, this design of diversity in its figures of speech. And we have to recognize that in order to honor Him and to actually understand the text that we are reading. So as I was saying, this term Proverbs is very fitting, because the book is filled with these things about wisdom and fear. And so that's what I want to do, is see that I want us to get the most out of the book of Proverbs, because the book of Proverbs shows up in everybody's little daily readings a lot. So when if you're gonna read this, how do you get the most out of it? Well, you got to understand what the purpose of it really is and what it is not. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples where we've sometimes misused Proverbs and why and how we ought to be using them. I'm going to pick a very popular one to start out with. Proverbs 22, verse 6. Reading in the ESV here says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it." Okay, so first off, the biggest thing that we need to realize is that the book of Proverbs is not an equation to happiness, or an equation to following instruction, or anything like that. It's not like A plus B equals C. It's given as a life lesson. It's not necessarily formulaic. So whenever we read this, what do we hear in our heads? Do we hear, well, if I do this, if I train up my child in the way he should go, then without a shadow of a doubt, God has promised that He will never, ever leave it. Is that how we read this passage? Because that's how it's often taught, right? Well, then what happens whenever we do our very best to teach that child and train them, and we've dedicated our lives to this, and then all of a sudden that child becomes a rebellious teenager or a crazy person in college or whatever, and then we go, "What happened, God? You promised right there in Proverbs 22, verse 6, that this would not happen." You see, what happens is we're reading this passage in a way that we shouldn't be reading it. It is not some sort of formulaic command. First off, I want to mention that this passage can also be read in a completely different way. And it's hard, you can even understand it in the translation that it's given, but let's look at the original Hebrew manuscript and see in the interlinear here, of what is actually being said in the Hebrew. And it's kind of hard to read once again because word-for-word translation is not a real thing. But if we start, Hebrew reads from right to left. So it says here, translating each word in the original, train up a boy on the mouth of his way, even when he is old, not he will turn aside from it. You got it? So you see how hard that is to kind of translate into English. But I want to look at another way that you can read this. First off, there is a word here that is often missed in our understanding of this translation. It's the 4th one over. So train up a boy on the mouth of, I guess that's how you're teaching them, his way. Okay, that word means his way, the boy's way, not necessarily God's way. So another way whoops, I went too far. Okay, so another way of looking at that would be train up a child in his own way, and when he gets old, he's not going to change. You see how it's a little bit different? So there are passages that are very equivalent to that. Like in Proverbs 15, it tells us there that a child is foolish in his heart, but the rod of correction will drive it away from him. So left on his own, a child needs direction. If he doesn't have it, he's going to invent his own way. He's going to do what he wants to do instead of anything else. And so the proverb is not necessarily telling us, do this and this will happen. What he's saying is, let me give you a life lesson here. Don't let that kid make his own decisions as a child. You need to train him. Because if you let him do his own thing, he's never going to change. He's going to be selfish. He's going to be greedy. He's never going to do anything other than what you allowed him to do. So it is a message of wisdom. It's giving you good advice on how you should live. It's not giving you this formulaic, well, God promised right there that this would never happen, and now we're going to hold God accountable for our mistakes or whatever it is, when really that was never the intention of the passage. The passage is there to teach you wisdom and the best action given certain situations. Let's look at another one that tells us right away that this is not A plus B equals C. Proverbs 26, ESV, verse 4 says, "Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself." Well, it's a command, right? Don't answer a fool according to his folly. Stop it, because you're going to be like him. But then read the next verse. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So, which is it, God? I mean, you told us, answer not a fool according to his folly, and then you turn right around and say, answer a fool according to his folly. Well, the reason why it's written like it is, it's telling you what's going to happen in either situation. And so what you have to do is determine, through wisdom, which situation requires what. So he's not giving you just this flat out, I don't have to think, all I got to do is follow that verse. What he's telling you is, yes, you have to think. You have to discern when it is a wise time to go along with some idiot and when it's a bad time to do that. You have to determine that. And he's given you words of wisdom to tell you, okay, if you allow and go along with the foolish words of this guy, this is the result. So keep that in mind. If you don't, this is the result. Keep that in mind. So you see how it's not necessarily some formulaic A plus B equals C type of thing. And so, of course, I'm just reiterating myself here, but anyway, the idea is there that the point of Proverbs is to make you think. Because that's how you become wise. It makes you think. Let's look at the point of the book. It's given to us right there in the first chapter of Proverbs. And I chose the NCV just simply because it's so plainly written that it gives us, without a lot of wordy confusion, it gives us a pretty good understanding of what this book is going to be about. So let's look here at the first 7 verses. It says, "These are the wise words of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. They teach wisdom and self-control. They will help you understand wise words. They will teach you how to be a wise and self-controlled, and will teach you to do what is honest and fair and right. They make the uneducated wise and give knowledge and sense to the young. Wise people can also listen and learn. Even they can find good advice in these words. Then anyone can understand wise words and stories, the words of the wise and their riddles. Knowledge begins with respect for the Lord, but fools hate wisdom and discipline." Okay, so in short, the point of the book is to have an understanding of wisdom and respect or fear, as many translations will say here, of God in everything. So that contrast there in verse 7 runs throughout the entire book. The wise person will do this. The idiot will do this. Okay? So be this and don't be this. That's kind of really what it does. It tells you how to be wise and how to be foolish. And the big key in it is right there in verse 7. Is God the middle? Is He the focus of your life? If everything's about God, you're gonna listen to Him and be on this side over here, the wise side. However, what's it say about the fool? He hates wisdom. He hates discipline. He doesn't want to hear this. Don't give me your Bible stuff. I don't want to deal with all that. So it is about putting God in the right place in your life. Now this term fear, let's talk about that for just a second. As the NCV called it, rightly enough, respect. Now don't get me wrong, everywhere in the Bible you see this word fear. It doesn't always mean just respect. It can mean a lot of things. This is the Hebrew word where we get this. Now we'll notice that I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead of myself. We're going to talk about wisdom first. Then we'll talk about fear. Okay, so this is the Hebrew word for wisdom that we'll see here. Now, I like that very first definition, number 1, right there, tells us that it is a skill. It's dexterity. So what's the difference between wisdom and knowledge? I mean, we often, do we use them interchangeably? Or is there a difference? Well, the difference between wisdom and knowledge is one is about understanding and one of them is about application. So, like, wisdom is the skill to use what you know. You can have all the school in the world and be a fool, according to Solomon. And it happens all the time. You can not be wise and still have tons of knowledge. You can just fill your mind with every piece of trivia you could possibly find, and you might still be a foolish person when it comes to putting that into application. It's about finding the value and the use of the knowledge that you've been able to learn. So when you learn something, what's the point if you can't use it, if you can't put it into action? And so wisdom is about that. A great example of this is your computer. I think at this point almost everyone probably has one. A computer's full of information, right? I mean, depending on how big your hard drive is, I've got, over a terabyte worth of information in my computer. But as of right now, Siri withstanding, it's pretty dumb. I mean, I can't really get any advice from my computer. It has the entire encyclopedia right there at its disposal, but it can't tell me how to use it. It can't tell me anything with any wisdom. It can only provide me with knowledge. So that is the main difference. So what is it that Solomon's trying to do through the book of Proverbs? Give you the skill to use what you know. So, let's look here about fear. So in Proverbs 9 verse 10 says, the fear of the Lord, this is in the ESV, is the beginning of wisdom. And the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Okay, so there's tools here he's given us. First off, the fear of the Lord is the first thing you've got to have before you can be wise. That's the very first thing. And it's going to be the central thing, is the fear of God. Now, when I say fear here, we'll talk about this word here a little bit further, but fear does not necessarily mean frightful or scared to death. It can mean a respect, but a fearful respect. Now, I believe if God was to show up right here, right now, every one of us would probably pee ourselves and fall on the ground. It would be a scary thing, right? So, yes, there is a scary nature to this, but that's not what Solomon's talking about. He's talking about being reverent and putting God in His place in your mind, so that you put Him on the throne of your heart, you put Him on the throne of your decisions, and you allow Him to guide you in how you use your knowledge that you have. Because it says that the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. So that's what you have. Your wisdom is going to be how to use it. In Proverbs 31, verse 30, charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So once again, what's he talking about here? A woman who's just, a frightened little mouse? No, it says a woman who respects the Lord fearfully is someone who is going to be praised. And of course, this is just an example in this passage of Proverbs 31, which is primarily talking about the virtuous woman. But this same concept is all throughout the book. It is about the skill of living in the fear of God. It helps us on how to make decisions and how to navigate the bumps of life that come our way. So whenever we see something in here, if we read it, instead of reading it as a bunch of commands that are given to us, instead if we look at it like, okay, situationally, if I find myself in this situation that Solomon is talking about, I have a better idea of what decision to make because of what he's telling me in this proverb. So if we actually start going through the Proverbs, we'll see that this concept is continuous. It has continuity. It's there everywhere. Almost all of them center around this idea of fearing God, respecting God, so that you might be wise in order to do what it is that you need to do in a given situation of life. You have to revere God in everything. You have to recognize His place in your life. You have to recognize that the things that He is going to do is going to be something we can utilize. We have to realize that we can lean on Him. We can lean on the Holy Spirit. We can find guidance there. But when we focus on our own selves, it's the foolish person who thinks himself wise. Isn't that what Romans 1 tells us? That the foolish people, they think themselves wise. They lean on their own wisdom instead of the wisdom that comes from God. And that makes them, in the words of Solomon, a fool. The fool, who is discussed often, all throughout this, he's the unwise person. He does not revere God. He looks to his own self for all his answers. And this is the default setting that we have in us as children. That's why it continuously tells us a child has a foolish heart, but the rod of correction will drive it away, and things of that nature. He's telling us, you're not born with this instinct to follow God. And that's what makes the way straight and narrow. Because you have to actually change the way you think to let God be the sovereign king of your life. You've got to commit to Him and lay it all before Him. So finally, if we look to a very popular passage, it may even be in your memory verses, Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. This is the key. This is what he's trying to tell us all throughout the book. This is fearing God, putting Him at the top, putting Him at the decision-making place, and then you just follow Him. And that is wisdom, whenever we choose to let that fear guide our decisions. So, as you go through the book of Proverbs, as you read it in your daily readings or your devotionals or whatever, try to keep this in mind, that it's trying to teach you how to make better decisions. That's really what it's all about. Don't look at it as a bunch of promises or a bunch of commands. Instead, look at it as advice, as it tells us there in chapter 1, advice for godly living so that things will work out according to God's will. And if our will is the same as God's will, then that's our will too. And we'll be a lot happier people as a result.